This
There we
conference will
go.
now be recorded.
And as it's about 10:02, we'll get started. So thank you all for joining us. Just looking at the number of people joining us, we're almost at 30, which is great. So thank you everybody for joining Preservation Massachusetts for another installment of our preservation conversations. Just a reminder, as you're joining us, please mute your phones. And throughout the course of this little presentation or conversation dialogue, if you do have questions that pop up during the course of this next hour, due to the number of people we have on the call, we would ask that you submit your questions via the chat feature. Depending on if you're using a Mac or PC, there should be a little box either on the right or left hand side of your screen that has what looks like a little conversation bubble. If you click on that, you can type in your question and we'll be able to see it. And we have saved time at the end of the call to hopefully answer as many questions as possible. And if not, you just gave us some homework that we can have for the rest of the day today. So as I said, this conference is going to be recorded and posted on the Preservation Mass YouTube website later on today. And just also remember, this is really informal. It's nothing, polished or anything like that. So we're kind of going wherever this conversation takes us. So once again, thank you all for joining us. And we kind of started this, in the wake of social distancing as a way to positively connect and share about, preservation topics, questions, issues, and we're hoping to continue this weekly as for the foreseeable future, and maybe it evolves into something else. So if you have any thoughts on future topics or feedback on how we can do things better, differently, my email is at the end of this presentation, so feel free to send me an email. So I'd just like to introduce today's participants. If you joined us last week, we had the whole PM team on, as we do today. We have the Preservation Mass Circuit Riders, Jeff Gagne and Stacia Kaplanson, along with PM's President Jim Igo and myself, Erin Kelly, and our Program Assistant Nick Moore. And we're very pleased today to be joined by the Massachusetts Historical Commission's Chris Skelly, who is the Director of Local Government Programs. Chris reached out to us after our session last week and asked if he could join us. So we're thrilled to be able to have him today. And thank you everybody for giving of this hour, and Chris for joining us. So just to kind of get started, just to kind of give you a little background about who the two organizations are. I know pretty much everybody on the call probably knows who our organizations are, but just for a little bit of clarity and to kind of kick things off, I'll just give a little brief update about, a little brief intro on who Preservation Massachusetts is, and then Chris can talk about who the Massachusetts Historical Commission is. So for those of you who don't know, Preservation Massachusetts, we are the statewide nonprofit historic preservation advocacy and education organization. As a private nonprofit, we are a 501c3. We don't get any state or federal funding. We subsist totally on memberships, foundation grants, fundraising events, that sort of thing. So our organization is really tasked with supporting preservation preservation efforts statewide through advocacy support, education, guidance, resources, training, that sort of thing. We were founded in 1985 and have been working since then. For our first 30 years, we were based in Boston, but for the past almost 5 years, we've been based out of Plymouth, Massachusetts. And our entire staff is on today. So we have 3 staff who work in our office. Most of the time, we're all working remotely now. And then we have our circuit riders, Jeff and Stacia, who work in the field. And what that means is they don't really come into the office. They work more face-to-face with individuals, organizations, communities who have questions about historic preservation, challenges, advocacy issues, that sort of thing. So we're really we really try to see ourselves as a resource and a network or a repository. If we don't know the answer, we probably know somebody who does. Last week we took some people through our website a little bit, talking about some of the different programs and features of our website, which has a lot of educational resources on them. And that's a hot topic for a whole nother session. So, right, so as we are statewide, I'll turn it over to another statewide counterpart. Chris, do you want to give a little background about who the Massachusetts Historical Commission is and what you do?
Sure. So happy to be here, and thanks for putting this all together. This is great. I really appreciate it. Since one of my favorite things to do is to be out around the state, spending time with all the local commissions. I'm definitely missing that right now. So Massachusetts Historical Commission was established in 1963, so we go back a little ways. And we were established to identify, evaluate, and protect the significant historic and archaeological assets of the Commonwealth. So our people at Mass Historical Commission include architectural historians and preservation planners, archaeologists. So the state archaeologist is in our office. Preservation architect is in our office. And things we do are things like identify and document historic resources around the state, primarily through what we call the MHC inventory forms. And then the National Register program, even though that's through the National Park Service, it comes up through each of the state historic preservation offices. So the National Register program is really in Massachusetts Historical Commission as well. And then we have several grant programs in our office, a bricks and mortar grant program called the Mass Preservation Projects Fund, and then one that's more for paper kinds of products, like planning kinds of projects. So lots of local commissions are familiar with that one. That's the Survey and Planning Grant Program. And then my role at Mass Historical Commission is local governments. So I work with all the local historical commissions around the state. So anything that's related to a local bylaw, like a demolition delay bylaw, a local historic district, would likely come to me. Things like outreach, public education, working within your city and town government. Basically anything that local historical commissions are involved in would come to me. Sometimes if it's a really specific question related to something else in our office, I need to forward you on to the appropriate division in our office. And so one of the things I mentioned, one of my favorite things to do is to be out doing regional workshops. So I have a lot of different workshops that I offer around the state on demolition delay or local historic districts, or the benefits of preservation, preparing a preservation plan. The one I do the most is probably the introduction to historic preservation. It kind of goes over all the basics. So I really enjoy that part, and then answer lots and lots of questions from local commissions. So I'm still doing that through email and phone calls. So more questions. If you don't get them answered today, feel free to email me later, and I'll see what I can do. And just kind of whatever I can do to help make the job of a local commission easier is kind of on my plate. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Chris. And again, we're really glad to have you here. And Preservation Massachusetts and Mass Historic Commission, it's the two organizations that, we work together. It's a good collaboration and a good partnership going forward. So I know some people have already started sending some questions in, which is great. We're going to get to those in a little bit. And we also had some questions emailed in last night. But now we're going to get into just kind of looking at some frequently asked questions. We're going to start off from the PM side. So turning it over to our wonderful circuit riders. So Jeff and Stacia, do you want to, what are some of the questions that you get asked the most in your role as circuit rider for Preservation Massachusetts? So I will turn it over to you guys.
Hi there, this is Jeff. Stacia, are you there too?
I am. This is Stacia.
Great, we'll tag team this.
Sounds good.
Well, I think, if we were just to talk kind of broad percentages, I would say a significant amount of cases that come before me in the eastern part of the state and questions revolve finding funding for preservation projects. And it's a challenge, and as you know, and there are great programs out there that are very competitive for the most part that specifically fund preservation projects. You know, think of the Mass Historical Commission's MPPF program, which is, you know, one of the few out there statewide that reliably funds preservation work, and particularly for towns that haven't adopted CPA, the Community Preservation Act, it's even more of a struggle. So, Stacia, I know you get that question a lot too. Where do I find funds for preservation? We've actually revamped a funding guide that's on our website now that deals specifically with this issue in a detailed way, because we were finding that we were sending that information out constantly, and to have a sort of up-to-date revamped resource that focuses just on potential sources of funding for preservation projects has been great to have and great to be able to send out there.
The other part that's also on the website is that there are specific guides as far as where to find funding for, say, your historic house, your barn, your nonprofit owned organization. So there are a few specific guides that are briefer than the overall guide. Those can be really helpful to start the conversation. The other place on our website to look is in 2017 at our statewide conference, there was a session on creative sources of funding for your historic preservation project, and that's another great resource that's on our website. So the wonderful thing about having things on the website is that the information is available 24/7. So even if you can't get in touch with us, the information is there. Another area that I get a lot of questions, sort of the second question after where can I find the money is, how can I find someone who can restore my chimney, fix my barn, come out and even just tell me what's going on with this old building that I have. I'm really concerned about my building and I want to be a good steward of my building. And on our website, we also have a preservation directory. And that's a place that I send people to oftentimes. It is a paid directory and has a list of many professionals who work in the preservation field. And it's a great place to start as far as trying to connect with some of the professionals who may be able to help you with your preservation project.
Mm-hmm. And I think another area, Stacia, that we seem to be coming across a lot lately is development pressures threatening historic properties. And so, for example, in our last several staff meetings, we've talked about, in particular, the remains of farmsteads in various towns with a house and a barn and outbuildings that may be sitting on, 5 or 7 acres of land that were the remainder, or the remnants of a much larger farmstead, where development has sort of encroached around the historic core of the property. And now, in some cases, the farmhouse and the outbuildings are threatened themselves. And that's been a real challenge, especially in the parts of the Commonwealth where the real estate market has been hot up until recently. And new building is happening at a big pace, and multiple house developments are going in on available land in towns. And it just seemed that there's been a spike in that kind of requests that have come my way in the last, 4 or 5 months or so. That was unprecedented, and those are a challenge, especially with a big old barn and a big old house. Now a significantly smaller lot of land than was originally there. What can happen with that sort of property? How can it be saved or repurposed? I think one of the things that we have to combat a little bit is the response that, well, let's turn it into a museum and people will come and visit it, and it's the last remaining intact farm building complex in town. And I think that's a challenge, to find suggested reuses or repurposing of these properties that are economically viable and are going to support themselves going forward, and to help communities think a little bit more broadly about the options for ways to preserve historic properties in their towns and cities.
And some related to that, some of my other favorite resources that I send folks to all the time are our list of model projects. We have some guides in our Preservation Action Center that also give lists of different types of historic buildings that have been reused for many different purposes. And so heading to our website, you'll find one that talks about historic churches and some of the various uses that they have been adaptively reused into, historic barns. And we're always looking for great model projects, because oftentimes, as Jeff said, when people are trying to figure out, well, what do you do with a building? There are some things that are logical uses for buildings and have been successfully done. And it's really a joy to be able to share some of those success stories when people contact us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff and Stacia. And if anyone has any, questions or questions for Jeff and Stacia, if you go to the contact page of our website, our access to our email is all right there, and we encourage you to go check out our website and the Action Center, which Jeff and Stacia were referencing, that has a lot of these resources available and lists. And if you can't find anything, please feel free to email me. If we don't know the answer, like I said, we probably know someone who does. So thank you so very much, Jeff and Stacia. And now we're going to turn it over to Chris. So Chris, from MHC's perspective, and your perspective there, what are some of the most frequently asked questions that you get? I know there were several themes when we were preparing for this, so I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so the most frequent question or sense of, it's almost more of a sense of confusion that comes into our office is that distinction between local historic district and National Register district. So it's probably what we're explaining. I could be at my cubicle explaining this to someone, and an hour later I'll hear the person in the cubicle next to me explaining the same issue. And it's that difference between the local historic district and National Register district, which is really confusing. I mean, it makes sense to me because I've been doing this for years, but really when I think about it, I can definitely understand why it is so confusing, because they're both called historic districts. So with National Register being primarily honorary, lots of times there's calls that come in with some sort of assumption that, oh, we're in a historic district, even though it's a National Register district, we must be well protected. So they can't demolish that building because it's in this historic district. And then we just have to explain that, no, it's a National Register district. It's not a local historic district. If it was a local historic district, then yeah, it would be much better protected. So I think that's probably the thing that I find myself explaining more than anything else. And then I'll go in with the questions. The follow-up question then is usually, well, then how do I establish a local historic district? And then I explain the process of the basics of local historic district, ultimately going to 2/3 majority vote at town meeting or city council. And then sometimes people ask after that, well, how long does it take to establish a local historic district? And that one I say, well, it could be 6 months. It could be a few years. It could be 20 years. It could be never. You never really know how your town meeting or city council is going to vote on things. So can't really have a timeline on establishing a local historic district. What was the next thing that you're? Were there other questions that come in typically? I guess I answered a lot of questions about demolition delay. We certainly get the funding questions as well. So I refer those over to our grants division typically. So that's for our Mass Preservation Projects Fund. So unfortunately, that is only for nonprofit organizations and municipalities, but that does cover quite a bit of things right there. And one of the things I'll mention, we end up taking a lot of calls just related, and I cannot answer these questions at all. Anything that's related to the building code, since I'm not an architect, and so not authorized to answer any questions related to anything in terms of accessibility or building code or fire code, all those kinds of things. But we are interested in having a resource guidebook that we have an RFP out for right now. So hopefully that will come together. It's going to be a resource guide that's designed for local commissions, and we'll have all kinds of just more layperson understanding of how the building code works in relation to historic resources, so that I think at the local level you'll have a much better sense of being able to speak coherently and understand how to respond to what your building inspector is saying, or what other kinds of property owners, developers are saying about why things can't happen because of the building code. It'll just have you'll have much better tools in front of you with this resource guide is what I'm hoping. So I'm really looking forward to that project.
Thanks, Chris. That sounds really interesting. Another thing you said was, and for your questions is, why can't why can't we, which I'm assuming is like historic commissions, have more support for historic preservation in their towns?
Sure. So, kind of the sort of a surprise, like why aren't we more supported in our community? Since how could historic resources not be supported? Yeah, I think that call comes in plenty of times as well. I like to respond with that with saying, if this was on the Board of Selectmen's agenda, would you be able to get a dozen people to show up at the Board of Selectmen supporting this preservation cause that you're interested in? And a lot of times I'll hear, no, we would never be able to get 12 people to show up at our Board of Selectmen's meeting. And that to me that really shows that, okay, well, then we have a conversation about really trying to do some grassroots constituency building. What are the steps that you would need to really pull together a group of people so that they're vocal, they're motivated, they're really interested in speaking up to local elected officials, and just sort of building something up in the community. So there's a real groundswell of interest, and those are the things that are really effective.
Thanks, Chris. I know that from some of the questions that we get too, it's always, if we get a call from somebody, or Jeff and Stacia get a call from one person, it's one of the follow-ups is, well, how many other people do you have a group? Are there other people that have the same concerns as you? And it's really one person can do a lot, but making sure that there's that people know about it, and grassroots constituency building and effective local advocacy is really where preservation starts. So we've had some questions that have been coming in. So I guess I'll open this up to some of these are more directed towards Chris, and some of them Jeff and Stacia and the rest of the PM team can kind of chime in on. One of them was actually kind of coming right out of demolition, kind of pairing well with demolition delay. Any suggestions for getting a demolition delay, I assume, by law approved in a town? Chris, that's right up your alley. Any suggestions?
Okay, sure. That sounds like, I guess that's mine. Do we know what town this person is from?
We don't. It just says very general. Any suggestions for getting a demolition by law passed? Plainfield. They just wrote it. It's in Plainfield.
Plainfield. Okay. All right. That's definitely helpful. Okay. Well, first things is to just kind of feel things out in the community. Talking to people. Plainfield is a small enough town that I think you'd really want to be able to just have lots of conversations around town and get a sense, is there interest, is there understanding what a demolition delay does, how it would benefit the community, how that whole process works at demolition delay. And if you're hearing concerns, then it's trying to compile what those concerns are, doing lots of listening about what their concerns are, and then compiling all those concerns together and figuring out how you address each one of the concerns that you're hearing. If you're hearing about lots of support, then it's taking things to the next level. Okay, you know, let's talk to the Board of Selectmen about this. Let's talk to potentially the Planning Board. And if you're already on, I'm assuming you're already on a historical commission, or like I said, that was an assumption on my part. You might be a local resident. In that case, it's directing your interest that you've been able to get a bunch of. You're on the commission. Okay, he says he's on the commission. All right. So if you're already on the Plainfield Historical Commission, then the next steps would be to think about, well, what's our bylaw going to look like? That would be a good time to be talking to me. We have a sample demolition delay bylaw in our demolition delay guidebook. So that's helpful to just use as a template. And then you can start getting that bylaw itself around town and seeing how people respond to that. I think it's really good to do some public meetings when we're whether that's online at this point or in person at some point. But really instead of waiting till it's that official public hearing stage or the town meeting stage, it's really trying to get those more informal, community-based, relaxed atmosphere, question and answer experience together about a demolition delay bylaw. So one of the concerns that comes up with demolition delay would be that there's the sense that this is going to impact a lot of property owners, and for the most part, it really doesn't. I mean, one of the things that's really useful is to do some research in the community, in the town hall, to find out how many properties are actually demolished in town each year. In Plainfield, it's probably pretty low. So ultimately, it wouldn't impact very many property owners. And it is only just a delay. I mean, a demolition delay is very limited, and I think that's an important message to get across. So it is a limited tool, even though it's certainly, I think, what every community in Massachusetts has. Another thing that's helpful with demolition delay is to have our statewide map. So we have a map that shows all the towns in Massachusetts that have demolition delay already. So you'd be able to see that there's about 150 cities and towns that already have demolition delay in Massachusetts. So that's very helpful. What one town did is actually put together a, like at their town day, like Old Home Days or something like that, some sort of get together. They had a board out, and they showed all the buildings that have been demolished over the past 25 years. And people were just shocked. I mean, people couldn't believe what had been lost. It was a real wake up for the people that came by and saw just how many buildings that were 200 years old or more that were now gone from the community. I think those are really helpful. But a lot of this comes down to your individual things happening in your community. So it's hard to necessarily come up with just general ideas. So yeah, please definitely email me back and forth, and we'll have some more conversations later. Happy to converse with you in the next couple of weeks about it.
Thanks, Chris. And when we're once again able to get out and actually meet with people, Chris has a really great demolition delay presentation that he goes around the state and produces and presents. So we did one. We co-sponsored one in early February in South Dartmouth, and it was really, really useful and really had a lot of really great information and good examples. So hopefully soon, Chris, you'll be able to be doing your presentations again very soon.
Yeah, I hope so.
So great. Okay. So another question we got, and I'll kind of open this up to everybody. Can a town grant a tax abatement of sorts in return for preservation? I guess. Any insight, Jeff, Chris? Any insight? Okay. Yeah.
I think I can take it if you want me to.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the short answer is no. Basically, a tax abatement would require a state law, and that would have to be done through the Department of Revenue, approved that way. So cities and towns in Massachusetts have a great amount of freedom. We're what's called a home rule state, and that's why we're able to have demolition delay bylaws and lots of other local bylaws that meet your needs. So you can write a local bylaw and pass it at town meeting and get it approved by the Attorney General's office, so long as it doesn't conflict with some other kind of state law or the state constitution. Doing a local abatement like that would conflict with state law, and so you would have to have a state law that would allow that local abatement to take place for all cities and towns that way. Now, I'll say that we actually already have that a little bit, and if you really want information on this, I can send it to you. But back in the early, I think back in the mid 1990s, there was something called the local option property tax abatement passed, and it was really well intended. So it sounded like a great idea, and it was basically this way to have the assessed value of your property go up slower if you rehabilitate your property, and then your assessed value is higher. It's a way to have that assessed value go up, I think 20% over a period of 5 years to get back to where it would be. So this already does exist. About 6 towns in Massachusetts passed this local bylaw. Not one property owner anywhere has ever come through to utilize this. So even though it was really well intended, it didn't really go anywhere. And I think that's just because, partly because of Massachusetts being so much of the value is in the land, and doing a substantial rehabilitation on your property that meets the Secretary of the Interior standards may not raise the assessed value of your property enough where it's worth taking in this property abatement, that the actual financial benefit to the property owner with this abatement is not high enough. Which isn't to say you couldn't have some sort of a local another abatement that's much stronger for residential property owners, but that would be something that would have to be done through a change to state law.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much. I had no clue about that. Thank you very much. This next one wasn't really a question. It was shared with everybody. It was more about the McGinley House in Milton, which is the subject of a demolition application. The new owner is reportedly proposing a 120 multifamily unit project. And there's someone who would like to raise awareness about the situation. And I believe Jeff has already sent a question about, or asked for more specifics about the address in Milton. So whoever sent this, if you want to reach out to, who sounds more like if you want to email Jeff Gagne with some more information about this. But Chris, this is a really good situation. Okay, it seems like Milton has a 2-year demolition delay bylaw. So in raising the awareness about the situation, this is kind of a good example of what to do. Okay, you already have a demolition delay bylaw. You have a historic resource that is now under that demolition delay. So Chris, Jeff, Stacia, any good suggestions as to next steps? Because Chris, you're right, it's only a delay. It's not automatically going to save the property. So any good suggestions on how to raise awareness about the situation, or what advocates can do once they're faced with a property that is now under their delay? What should they be doing now?
Sure. Who did you want to go first?
Well, I can jump in, Chris, if that's helpful, since you've done a lot of the heavy lifting so far. But first of all, James, who brought this case to us, if you want to email me separately at jgagno@preservationmass.org, I can follow up with you, because I'm right across the border in Dorchester, so I know Milton pretty well, and I'd be happy to sort of have a follow-up conversation with you after this. But I think one of the challenges is particularly where a large new development could be coming on mind is, you know, are there ways to preserve the historic or existing structures on the site if it's large enough, and to add buildings to the site in a way that, you know, preserves the other structures, but still, you know, particularly if affordable housing is involved, gets needed housing of various kinds built. I understand it's tricky in this case when there's a garden and landscape issue as well, that if you build on it, then you're, you know, potentially, you know, really destroying essentially a critical, you know, historic feature of the property. But I think that there's, you know, we've seen many examples of development happening close to historic structures in a way that is, you know, reasonably sensitive, preserves the historic structures, satisfies the need for new construction and new housing in particular, that can be a win-win. If the current plan is to wipe the slate clean of the entire parcel and start from scratch, that's another challenge, but these are a conversation, and you're lucky in Milton that you have 2 years to have that conversation. Again, I'd be happy to follow up with more details and share ideas. I know, you know, some other advocates, Anthony San Marco, for example, in Milton, who knows a lot about history. There are people, I think, who could help build the case locally for the preservation of the structures of the property. You know, that, you know, again, with this window for the demolition delay, you have a little bit of time to get organized and help build awareness about the property.
Thank you, Jeff. That's helpful. Chris, do you want to jump in too?
Sure. So during that window of opportunity, and it's amazing to have a 24-month window of opportunity for demolition delay. It's a little tough to sort of come up with that boilerplate process of how you save something during the delay, because every project is a little bit different in terms of what the threat is and what the potential outcomes are. So I think it's getting some of the specifics there. So in the guidebook that we put together, I put together some of and in the presentation that I do, the workshop on demolition delay, I give a bunch of examples of success stories with demolition delay. So in some cases, the property owner has changed their mind. They decide that they're not going to demolish it. They realize that the building was significant and changed their mind. In some cases, the developer has worked out some other kind of solution so that the building can still be saved, but some sort of development can still take place, so that you get two things. You get both things happening that way. In some cases, the historical commission has come up with a solution. So Reading is one of my favorite places because they've had some amazing successes and really creative ways that the local historical commission has worked within city government, worked within their town government to save some buildings. In the one case in Cambridge, where the developer was saying, well, the building doesn't meet building code, I have to demolish the building because the building doesn't meet code. And the Cambridge Historical Commission said, no, we're not going to buy that. They're savvy enough to know that basically almost every building in Massachusetts does not meet the building code, because the building code's always changing. So they didn't approve the demolition at that point, and in the end, the building was sold to another developer who rehabbed the building into condos. So it's just amazing what you hear out there, and what the reasoning for why things have to be torn down. And sure enough, somebody else comes along and rehabs it. Of course, during the delay period, you always have that option of establishing a local historic district and permanently protecting a building. So we have a bunch of successes with that at this point. So in Milton, I mean, with 24 months, if town meeting is willing, you definitely have enough time to establish a local historic district. And so during that delay period, even though it's just the demolition delay is just a delay, if you go to town meeting and successfully can establish a local historic district there, that building can be permanently protected. And you can do that as a single building local historic district as well. So lots and lots of single building local historic districts in Massachusetts, and they are fully protected structures. Before any changes, it's just like any local historic district. Before any change, they would need to have approval of the local historic district commission before they can be altered or demolished. So that is by far the most effective strategy if you can establish a local historic district. But understood, that's a high bar to pass in some cases, but it is always that local option if you can do it. All right, well, I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Okay. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Chris. Moving on, another question. Okay, well, where did it go? Okay. So this is probably another one. Sorry, Chris. You're talking a lot today. We have a question about what are the steps necessary for a community to become a certified local government? Is that something you can address, Chris?
Yeah, sure. Do we know what town or city that is?
I believe it's Nantucket.
Okay, Nantucket. Okay, so certified local government basically means that was a program that was established by the National Park Service back in the 1980s, and they basically recognize that. So there's the preservation policy, funding, the whole structure of historic preservation at the national level is through the National Park Service. So we get funding from our office. Our office funding, the Historic Preservation Fund, comes from the National Park Service. I have to do a state historic preservation plan, and that has to get submitted and approved by the National Park Service. And so back in the 1980s, the National Park Service recognized that really the strength of historic preservation is always at the local level. It really always comes down to what can we do at the local level. And they wanted to really have some sort of program that would recognize that preservation is local, and how do we really give some extra assistance to those local communities that really are doing an outstanding job with their preservation program. And so that is the Certified Local Government Program. It's a national program through the National Park Service, but it is administered by Mass Historical Commission. And one of the benefits of being a certified local government is that you have a higher chance of getting a survey and planning grant through our office. So the survey and planning grants, sometimes they're, depending on how much funding we have, sometimes they're only giving to certified local governments. Sometimes they're given to certified local governments and non-certified local governments. Either way, if you are a CLG, you have a much higher chance of getting one of these grants from our office. So, okay, so that's the benefit, and that's why cities and towns would be interested in Massachusetts to be a CLG. The process to be a CLG would be, the first thing is that you have to have a local historic district. So you have to have a local historic district that was passed by town meeting or city council. And in this case for Nantucket, yes, you have that already. You have to have a local preservation program in place. So we have to be able to recognize that you have a pretty good program of identifying, documenting resources, that you have an active commission in place. Nantucket certainly has all of those things as well. So the next steps are just, if you want to be a CLG, there's an application that I can send to you. It's a pretty simple application, just a few pages long, but it does have to be signed by your local elected officials. So they're basically the chairperson of your board of selectmen has to sign it. And then you're sending that into our office. I look it over. If it looks good, maybe I'll have a few questions, but for Nantucket, I don't think I would have too many questions. And at that point, there'd be some more paper that would need to be signed by your chief elected official, your board of selectmen, select board. And then that all gets sent back to me. And then I send it back to the National Park Service, and the National Park Service would actually approve you as a certified local government. So the process can take a few months sometimes, but it's pretty straightforward. It's not really that complicated. And when there's questions, I can walk you through whatever's needed. We've had some recent CLGs in the last few years: Framingham, Marblehead. There's one other one, but there's been some recent CLGs that have gone through this process. It's not too difficult.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. Moving on, we have a question about what tools are available to protect the character of small-scale, low-rise neighborhood commercial districts from overdevelopment. So open this up to anybody, Chris, Jeff, Stacia, any tools or good examples that you've seen?
So I can start again then. Again, I think probably what you want to have for a tool is just some background, a plan of some kind. What's there right for like, say, for zoning. So what are all your existing conditions? What's the potential for change based on what you have there right now, and what are some things that would need to be put in place? So maybe some simple zoning changes might be useful. Maybe you'd want to have some stronger protections, like an architectural preservation district or a local historic district. And I think you want to think about how local zoning could also be a real assistance in some ways. Is there ways that your zoning could be written so that it could offer some additional uses? So adaptive reuse in some ways, where upper stories might be able to have some different kinds of uses that aren't allowed right now. There's some really interesting ways of so like in East Hampton, I did a tour there a couple years ago for a mill building. And so parking is often a big issue. So we want to think about, well, this is just ridiculous for zoning in a lot of cases to be able to say you've got to have on-site parking when it's a downtown village center, where that really should be off-site somewhere on the street. In this mill building in East Hampton, they basically said, we're not going to have, it's a huge mill building. They basically said, we're not going to have any parking requirements here. You as the property owner, you figure out what works for parking. And it was a really interesting way of looking at things. It happens to be right on a bike path. So that was one of the things that the property owner, the developer there, really took advantage of, is to try to say, okay, well, how can I get as many people that work in this building as possible to ride their bike here? So I think lots of creative things can be done in terms of trying to protect those village centers or small downtowns. Probably starting off at first with just what's happening, what are the threats, what are the existing conditions, and then going from there.
And I can also add, can be a complicated question, because I've seen some neighborhood commercial districts in the city of Boston, and I've been involved with the Boston Main Streets program for 20 years now, where actually what's left and is currently a low-rise commercial district is the remnants of a much denser area with multi-story buildings. So for example, we discovered through some research that in this one commercial area in Hyde Park in particular, there was a string of single-story buildings that were actually the surviving first floors of a group of 3- and 4-story buildings originally. So it's interesting to kind of poke around and find out what you're left with, what's there now. How does that, relate to the history of the commercial development of the area? Could, in some cases, reconstructing those upper floors actually help preserve the viability of the commercial district by adding new units of housing, which means new customers for the businesses on the ground floor. And so I think there are a lot of things that can be tangled together in those sorts of situations, and preserving the uses versus preserving the buildings, or what evidence can you marshal that in some cases can prevent all the old stuff from being swept away in a sort of massive new block development of some kind, replace that the local structures that have evolved over time in the district. So it is a tricky situation, especially here in Boston, and particularly if you're around a T-stop now, where there's so much development happening, transit-oriented development that tends to be multi-story and replaces smaller, older buildings. So we've seen a lot of that certainly here in the city of Boston.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Chris. Very much. It's about 10:53. We'll try to take a couple more questions. And I just, and before we actually ask all the attendees a couple of things to think about. But if we haven't been able to get to your question, I would encourage you to, I'm trying to write them down so we can follow up. But I would strongly suggest or ask that you send, you can send me an email with your question, and I will forward it to Chris, to Jeff, to Stacia, and we'll work to get your question answered as best that we can. But these are really great questions. Thank you so very much. This is a little bit of an interesting question that I received via email. The question is, are there currently any ways for historians, preservation professionals to volunteer their time and expertise, obviously working from home, on preservation initiatives? The person who asked had some spare time and would love to assist a worthwhile project. So I don't know of any, like central place to ask, but if there are any ideas, any suggestions on where this person can inquire, whether with a local historic society, commission, local nonprofit. So I guess I'll just open it up to everybody for some suggestions, and maybe this is something PM can try to work on.
Yeah, I would say if there is a local nonprofit in your area, like Springfield Preservation Trust or Preservation Worcester, any of the nonprofit organizations that serve their local community, if you have time, reach out to these organizations, because they may have projects that they would be very happy to welcome you to be part of.
Yeah, thank you, Stacia. Yeah, I would really suggest just trying to reach out locally in your own community, or a local or regional nonprofit. Just they may have things that you that they haven't been able to do because of staffing or expertise, and you never know what you can find, and maybe there's an opportunity for PM to try to help connect professionals to these initiatives that need some more work. So okay, I think we'll be able to take one more question. This is is there a listing of historically significant buildings by city and or town? So Chris, do you want to, I don't know if this, Macris would be the correct answer for this. Do you want to talk, quickly about Macris, or answer the question?
Sure. Again, it's like probably better if that person contacts me directly, so I can find out why they're asking that question.
Okay, great.
Because it's not necessarily Macris. I mean, that's not. I mean, it could say National Register, I could say State Register, I could say Macris, but all of those really wouldn't be correct. Macris is not necessarily a list. Macris is not a listing of historically significant buildings, really, although it's sometimes it's easy. It's sometimes thought of that way, but that's really not what Macris is. So it's probably helpful for me to understand what their goal is in asking that question. It sounds like they're asking something statewide, and not just for their own community.
It looks like they're going to. It looks like they're going to. They just responded, and I think their person's going to contact you directly. So.
Okay, great.
Okay, great, wonderful. So I know we had a couple more questions, and I'm trying to write them down. But if again, if your question was not answered or you had a follow-up question, please shoot me an email, and I can get it sent off to Chris, to Jeff, to Stacia, to anybody who was on the call today who might be able to help you. But just before we go, one thing that we wanted to do, and you don't have to you don't have to answer now. Again, feedback via email. Or even in the chat box would be really helpful. But just some food for thought for everybody who's on this call. And we had 2 people on the call last week, and now we've had over 40. So we're really, really grateful for this. And Chris, I think having you on had something to do with that bump in attendance. So thank you for being with us. But just some questions that we as preservation organizations, Preservation Mass and Mass Historical Commission, we want to hear from you. What kind of online trainings would you find useful? What kind of in-person trainings? As you heard, Chris has a lot of presentations that he does all over the state, and they're really, really good. But are there other in-person trainings, workshops that you would find useful and helpful? What sort of online resources and materials would you like to have? Because our lives were pushed so quickly into having to social distance and work remotely. This is one of the reasons why we started doing these preservation conversations, was that so we could try to capture and share some information that would be available online. Again, there is nothing that can replace, in-person workshops and meetings and that face-to-face, person-to-person connection. But what sort of online resources and materials would you like to have that can be a good first step or help you with preservation questions? And then also any suggestions for future topics for these conversations. We've, excuse me, we've kept them pretty informal and just open conversations, just talking about basic questions. But if there could be any future suggestions for topics, I'm seeing some come in-person training on zoning, building reuse and fundraising, online training for preparing preservation plans. If there's other people or other preservation professionals or other people you'd like to have on, like we were able to have Chris with us today, that you can pick their brain on certain questions. That would be really helpful for us, because I said we want to have these meetings throughout the month of April, and actually we've kind of committed to ourselves that we'd like to keep doing these even once we're able to meet with people again, and the social distancing hopefully is in the past. So any other suggestions or thoughts, you can email them to me. I will share them with Chris also. And we're hoping that, as we do this next week, we can have, Chris with us again, having the expertise of, his experience and, all of the great information that he has from working with local communities at MHC is just so very valuable. So thank you very, very much. So thank you, everybody. Again, email your questions if we weren't able to get to them. We're really sorry. We did really want to try to keep this to an hour. But if you have, so just a reminder, we'll be doing another one of these conversations next Wednesday. And if we get a lot of other questions, we may just kind of do the same format again. But next Wednesday, April 15th, from 10 to 11, grab your coffee, grab your tea, and join us. And as always, you can contact Preservation Massachusetts with any questions. And also you can contact Chris at MHC as well. If you need contact information, I'm sure Chris won't mind if I share his email or forward him any emails. So any other, and yes, this recording will be posted to our website. That will happen a little bit later on today, and also will be on our YouTube channel. Chris, any parting thoughts or comments? Or anybody have any parting thoughts or comments?
No, just thank you for putting this together. I'm happy to participate again. It's a great opportunity for me, and I've just definitely, of course, put my email out to all the attendees. That'd be great.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very, very much, and thank you all for taking an hour out of your day. We hope that you're all still healthy and safe, and we're here to help with any questions you might have. And thank you so very much for all you do for preservation in your communities. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.